Welcome to the Film Florida podcast. I'm John Lux, and I'm the Executive Director of Film Florida. Before we get to our interview, if you're not already a member of Film Florida, please consider joining at filmflorida.org. Please also consider going to our website and donating $20.25 for our 2025 fundraising campaign. Visit the Film Florida merchandise page at filmflorida.creator-spring.com to purchase Film Florida t-shirts, sweatshirts, coffee mugs, and more. All merchandise proceeds go to the Film Florida Filmmaker Grant and Scholarship Fund. South Florida's Wil Shriner is a comedian, director, actor, writer, host, and MC. He began his career as a stand-up comedian in Los Angeles. After dozens of appearances with David Letterman, Leno and Johnny Carson, Wil was tapped to host his own national talk show, The Wil Shriner Show, in the late 1980s, where he earned 3 Emmy nominations. In addition to his acting credits, he has directed hundreds of hours of television and film, including episodes of Frasier, Everybody Loves Raymond, My Wife and Kids, Gilmore Girls, and many more. Working closely with Florida legend Jimmy Buffett, Wil wrote the screenplay and directed the movie Hoot, which was filmed in Florida and based on a Carl Hiaasen book. Hoot was inducted into the Museum of Modern Art's collection in New York and was named by the Smithsonian Museum as one of the top 5 environmental films. We talk about all of this and more on this episode of the Film Florida podcast. Here's my conversation with Wil Shriner. Welcome to the Film Florida podcast, Wil.
Hey, it's great to be here. I know a number of your members and been around Florida my whole life, on and off, so I'm happy to support filming in Florida. We love it here.
Excellent. Well, let's start kind of at the beginning. Like, what is your origin story? Where did you come from?
I came from outer space, and then we touched down. No, I was born in Manhattan. My dad was on television in the 50s. He had a TV show called Two for the Money and the Wil Shriner Show. So I was born in Greenwich Village. And after my dad's show got canceled, he just said, I'm out of here. Let's go to Florida. So we moved here in 58. Long time ago, and lived down here. I went to grade school down here, and then we moved back to California. My dad was going to take another crack at showbiz, and we went out there for 4 years, and then he said, okay, it's not happening. Let's go back to Florida. So then I came here and I went to high school here. I went to Cardinal Gibbons High, where it's a famous Catholic high school here. And I just had lunch with John O'Hurley, if you know Mr. Peterman.
Absolutely.
From Seinfeld. He also went to Gibbons, and Kelsey Grammer, who's a buddy of mine, went to Pinecrest. So there's a lot of Florida showbiz people still hanging around here. We all still love Florida and, have an affinity for it. So I was here until I went to University of Florida for a couple of years, and then I transferred to go to UCLA Film School, where I studied film and television in their film program. And then I started getting jobs. I went to work for Max Baer Jr., Jethro, and I got a job as a PA on Ode to Billy Joe in 1977. And it was a great job. If you ever can get a job on a show, and I remember, I'll fly myself there. I'll pay my own way. Just give me a hotel and a per diem, which they did. And I got my SAG card on that movie. And then I worked each week in a different department. So I worked in transpo and electric grip, and I worked in all the different areas of making a film for a week. And I went back to California with a lot of experience, and back to UCLA with more experience than a lot of the teachers there. I find that was a very helpful for the young people starting out, is just get a job on a set. Everybody wants to work on a set, and you go, what do you want to do? They don't know what they want to do. They go, I'll do anything. There is no anything job. Pick something. Right. And I found out, with going to film school, you're going to start making your small projects. You better know what everybody's job is. If somebody said, give me a half double, I knew exactly what that was. That's, I think, one of the tips I would have for young people is, be informed, understand the process. I mean, there's a lot of film schools out there now. I mean, there's some great ones here. Full Sail is supposed to be a great school. And I went up with to Orlando, what is it, Central Florida, UCF there, and did a weekend there lecturing the kids. And a lot of them, they not really sure what they want to do. And I think you got to sort of figure something out. Everybody wants to be a director. Well, start somewhere else and work your way up to that, Yeah. I became a director, out of film school. I made my first film at UCLA won an award. It was a Project One film, and I won an award with money donated by Jim Morrison of The Doors. Had left money to give awards out for film. So my first award in film was a Jim Morrison award,
Wow.
and it was like a check for $1,000, maybe $1,000 or something. It was like, hey, I'm on my way. But that was my start being a filmmaker. And then I discovered comedy a couple of years later, and it took me in a whole other direction.
Well, let's talk about the comedy stuff for a little bit. You started as a stand-up comedian in LA, and you worked with David Letterman, Jay Leno, Johnny Carson, all the big ones. What were these experiences like? How did this background in comedy help you throughout your career? But how did you get your start in comedy?
Well, in the 70s, there was a place called the Comedy Store and the Improv, and they were sort of the first two kind of showcase clubs. And you didn't get paid. You went in, you got to do 6 minutes, and if you were good, they'd ask you to come back. And then if you were good enough, they'd make you a regular. I was fortunate enough that I was good enough that I became a regular pretty quickly. And there was where a lot of guys, David Letterman, Michael Keaton, you name it, Michael Richards, Richard Lewis, Gary Shandling, we were all hanging out and watching each other do our comedy and learning from each other. And we all became friends and supportive of each other. And so when David started doing The Tonight Show, my first 3 appearances on The Tonight Show were with Letterman. And I would come out in what they call the desk spot. So he does a monologue and then there's a commercial. And the desk spot where Johnny used to do his desk bits or his sketches. So I would be coming out showing little funny films. I'd done a film about behind the scenes at The Tonight Show. I'd done something about the Democratic Convention. My first 3 shots were with Dave. And then Dave got a TV show in New York called The David Letterman Show, which was a morning show live from 10 to 11:30 every day. We were on for 18 weeks. We were losing affiliates left and right because they were used to game shows. And Dave's sensibility was not suited particularly for daytime, but it was a great experience. And there, Barry Sand, who was the producer of the show, had once said to me, if David doesn't show up, I'm going to put you in the chair. I'm like, what? Oh, okay, I better pay attention. So, that was tucked in the back of my head. And years later, I think 7 years later, I became a talk show host of my own show, the Wil Shriner Show, which was a syndicated show in 87. And the way I got that was Alan Thicke was supposed to host that. And Alan Thicke got a show called Growing Pains.
Sure.
So he bailed out. And then they came to me and said, hey, you want to take this daytime talk show we're talking about? So I did that. So my background is in everything as an actor, as a talk show host, because as an actor, I had done a film for Letterman with my dogs that steal my car and drive around the neighborhood. And Francis's casting director on Peggy Sue saw it and brought me in to meet and read on it. And then he said, come back and meet Francis. And I didn't even care if I got the part. I just wanted to meet Francis. I'm a big fan of Francis Coppola. So, I remember going in there. We had a nice, 20 for 30-minute conversation. I'm sitting on the couch with Judge Reinhold and Steve Guttenberg. And I'm thinking, well, what's not right here? But none of those guys got it. They went with Nick Cage, of course, got that role. But Francis saw something in me and he put me in this role opposite Joan Allen as Arthur Nagel. And I did that. And then I did an Amazing Stories episode a week or 2 after that. And I thought, well, I'm going to be an actor. I got some good credits here. And then this talk show came along and well, that sounds like fun. So I've always been a guy with no focus. I just go where the jobs are, which I think is good. Some guys have a destination. I've always been very flexible. So I did that for a long time, the talk show. And then I did a show called The Home Show where we went out. It was an ABC network show, and we went out and did pieces all over the country, all over the world, actually. Went to Hong Kong, went to London, went to Paris, and did these little funny 4 or 5 minute videos for the show. And it was another live ABC network show. And when that got canceled, I was thinking, what should I do now? And my manager at the time says, hey, they're looking for a Wil Shriner type. And I said, oh, hey, listen, you should submit me. And he says, no, a younger, cheaper Wil Shriner. I go, oh, okay. There is a caveat because I'm not getting cheaper. So I thought, well, I better do something else. So I went to, if you know who Jimmy Burrows and Jay Sanders are, they're 2 great sitcom television directors. And Jay goes way back. I used to play cards with Jay. And Jimmy Burrows is the king of sitcom directing. Yep. So I went to a talk they were doing. And in the elevator on the way down, I bumped into Kelsey Grammer. And Kelsey said, what are you doing here? I said, well, I'm getting old. I'm thinking maybe I should start directing television. So he said, why don't you call my office tomorrow and come down and watch what we do? And I said, I'd love to, So I went down there for like 8 months as a sponge and just went and watched all the top directors I watched Pam Fryman, Andy Ackerman, all the greats came through Frasier. And after about a year, Peter Casey, who was one of the main producers, said, well, why are you hanging out so much? I said, Peter, if you haven't figured it out by now, I want to direct. And he goes, well, we're going to give you one in January. And I was like, oh, holy shit. So, I got one in January 1st of 2000. And it was a great script by Jake Kogan. It dealt with racism and everything else. And it hit all the buttons. It won a Humanitas Award, and it was my first episode, so it was a good one. And then I did an episode of Ladies' Man with Alfred Molina and Betty White, and then I closed it out with the season finale of Raymond, which I just kind of lucked into. And so everybody loved Raymond season finale. So I got 3 episodes right off the bat, and then I got 7. Then I got 15. Then I got 18. Each year you build up as a director, and you get more and more episodes as you go along. So that's how that all happened.
Well, you glossed over a little bit working with Francis Ford Coppola. Talked about that experience. And now it doesn't seem like you were really in the directing mode at that time, but what did you take away from it that you were able to use later on?
No, I had been a film student and I'd made home movies all my life. So no, I was in the directing mode. And I remember going to dailies Jordan Cronenweth, who was our DP, phenomenal DP who had done Blade Runner and all these other things. So I used to show up at the dailies. In those days, we would watch the dailies in a hotel ballroom somewhere on a screen with just the production people. And I was the only actor that showed up every day. And they're like, why are you here? You're not in these scenes. I go, I'm here going to school. I'm here to learn. And I watched Francis a lot. And he knew I was interested in directing. Barry Miller, who was an actor who was not giving Francis what he wanted. And Francis would just do another take and another take. I said, why are you doing so many takes? He goes, I'm wearing them down. I'm wearing them down. But it was such a great vantage point to watch a movie from I wasn't involved at all in the pre-production on the movie, but I did go to all the dailies. I wasn't involved in the editing at all, but it was, to me, and I recommend this to anybody. I mean, you're going to learn from everybody, and once I was sitting with Jimmy Burrows at dinner, we were doing Encore, which was a Nathan Lane show that didn't last too long. And Jimmy said, come on, let's have dinner. So he said, why are you here? And I said, well, you want to do what you do. And he goes, well, you're not going to learn anything watching me. I go, really? He goes, no. You want to know how to learn? And I said, how? And he said, find out who's the worst television director working and go watch them. And you'll see the mistakes they make. You'll see the coverage, the angles, everything that they do wrong. And you'll either get it or you won't. And that was great advice. I won't mention who I went to watch.
Right. No names.
No names. But he, I did, that was just great advice because, whenever you're on a set, and I sometimes feel guilty as an actor on a set, I'll look at the director and I'll say, if the camera's a little more left, you get better eyes on us. Oh, and then they get, I don't want to threaten anybody. You never want to, you just make a suggestion, soft suggestions is what we call them, But that's what, working with Francis was just a great experience. We went to his house every weekend. He had a vineyard in Napa Valley and he had bankrolled the caterer. So they were giving us free lunch at his house on the weekends, and everybody was over there. I mean, Jim Carrey, Harry Basil, Kathleen Turner, and John. We all went there every weekend because it was sort of a free party every weekend. And we shot in Sonoma and Santa Rosa, and we shot 9 weeks, and it was just a great experience, we were all young, it was for Joan Allen's first movie, and we had a kissing scene, and I remember saying to Joan, let's 50-50. And she goes, what's that? I go, well, let's get an angle so they can see half your face and half my face. I don't want to be only one on camera kissing. Oh, okay. So, and look at what happened to her. She went on to win an Oscar, so she was a pleasure to work with. What's her name was on, Helen Hunt was on that movie. Sofia Coppola was the daughter. So Sophia was hanging around in those days. And Francis's 2 sons, Gio and Roman, were both on the set all the time with video cameras filming the rehearsal process. What we did do, to Francis's credit, and he said he did it on The Godfather. He had a dinner where he invited all the cast, and Talia made a big dinner because they were all intimidated by Brando. But after this dinner and a lot of wine, everybody kind of coalesced as a family. So Francis says, I do that whenever I can, whenever I have the luxury. So on Peggy Sue, we had 2 weeks on a soundstage at Laird, which is Culver City Studios, and we all just rehearsed, and the boys were shooting the stuff. And Francis would tell you they were shooting Captain EO across the way, so he took us all over there. Victoria Storaro, who was the DP on that, can we go in there and watch? So we got to watch a little of Captain EO with Michael Jackson, and it was just like a fun week. I remember Jim Carrey had no car, so he mooching a ride to work with me every day. And what's ever happened to him?
Yeah, how about it?
It was really a bonding experience that Francis set up in this rehearsal process, and we all bonded as we're supposed to be high school friends all our life. So, you can act that, but, it's better when you can create that in sort of a real environment. And sadly, Gio was killed in a boating accident on Gardens of Stone a couple of months, I think a year later. It's just a sad thing. It really set Francis back a little bit on his, his whole pace, because he did Peggy Sue. He was doing it to save the vineyard. Because he's been up and down. He's got this new one. I haven't seen Metropolis yet, but I guess he rolled all the coins again on this one. So we'll see.
Now, you mentioned some of your directing credits in television. You mentioned Frasier. You mentioned Everybody Loves Raymond. You also did some of the Gilmore Girls, among many others. What is your approach to directing episodic television?
Well, when you first start, you just want to make everybody happy. What you do in television, you have a lot of masters. You have a studio, you have a network, you have a production company, and then a bunch of exec producers and what they call the showrunner. And that's the guy that's really the guy that has the final say. So on Frasier, the two showrunners were Chris Lloyd and who's the other showrunner? I'm spacing out on the other showrunner. But Chris Lloyd was like the main guy I would look to. And that was David Lloyd's son, who'd grown up around Cheers and everything. So you come in there and you want to make them happy, but you also want to get hired again. You want to get a job, you want to get a job with the same studio, with the same network, and you have to get approved. The networks approve you, so I'm working for 4 networks: ABC, NBC, CBS, and the WB. So I had 4 different networks that I was approved at. And then I had the studios. I had Paramount, I had Warner Brothers, and Disney. So I had all of those. So like when you go over to do Wife and Kids, you're kind of the new guy over there. And so you try to not rock the boat, but I used to like to observe, come out a day or two before, watch a show prior to being there, so to see where the power is, who has the control, and who's saying we're moving on, who's saying we're not moving on. Let's do that again. On some shows, like I remember on Wife and Kids with Damon, those guys would do a scene in rehearsal, and then they would just make the crew stand around while they would rewrite. And it was not the most productive way, but that's the way they did it. In Frasier, we do a run through, and they would go away, and you go back to the writer's room with the writers after the first table read, and you'd talk with the writers about, well, this seems like work, this didn't work. So, you try to be, you try to contribute to a point. I mean, I remember when I was doing Becker with Ted Danson, and I would occasionally give Ted a line or give him some business, some funny business, and it would always get a big laugh. And the showrunner would go, "Ted, great joke." And Ted would go, "Oh, that's Wil." I go, "Oh, thank you, Ted." Yes. But yeah, so they felt like, and I used to say to the showrunner, "Hey, a little free funny doesn't hurt. It gets me back, gets me coming back." So I ended up doing 7 Beckers when I was over there. And Ted was very gracious. And the whole cast was gracious over there. I mean, I've never been on a show where people weren't gracious. Sometimes the one person who won't like you is the assistant director, who's probably going to lose an episode to you. So they're not always the most welcoming. There's been a few where they, they're not helping you a lot. And for me, being a comedian and an actor and a director, I had a lot of tools in my bag. And at table reads, I would always shoot our rehearsal with a big wide lens. So then I could go back home at night and then do all my camera blocking, right there. And I didn't have to remember anything. I just saw the scenes. He crosses in here. So I would have all my camera notes ready to go in the morning. So I was always very fast at camera blocking, because when you're shooting a sitcom, I don't know if everybody listening knows how, the first day is a table read, sometimes rehearsal, sometimes not. Second day is just purely rehearsal with you and the cast, and the writers come in and listen, and then they give them notes if they want to, or they go back and rewrite. The third day, more of the same. You rehearse with the cast, the studio and the network comes and watches the run through, and then they give notes to the producers. And then the fourth day, all the camera guys everybody shows up with cameras, and now you start blocking it out. You show the camera guys what you're doing, and then first team or the principal actors go away, and second team comes in, and these are all the stand-ins who, normally, and they're good. They know the characters they're standing in for. they don't run lines, but they just make the moves. So then you set your camera marks and you set your you set all that up for your first take and your second take, because each sitcom when we shoot two passes of each scene. So you'll shoot the scene twice. In one pass, you might have close-ups or stream, or in the second pass, you might have overs or two shots or whatever. You work that all out on Thursday, and then Friday you come back for a refresh, and then you bring the audience in Friday night or Tuesday night. Some shoot Tuesday, some shoot Friday, and the audience comes in like at 6, and you're hopefully walking out of there by 9:30. Now, on Frasier, we were walking out of there by 9. On other shows, we were walking out of there at midnight. It just depended on the show and the showrunners and how solid the scripts were. But I always felt like I got lucky because I got a lot of good scripts where we didn't have to rewrite a lot of stuff. I was on one show where they had like 28 pages around a dining room table, and I was like, well, I can have them get up and go get coffee. I can have them do everything, but you still got 28 pages around a dining room table, and they didn't. Well, we don't like the blocking. I go, well, I can only work with what I got,
Yeah.
And that was only one of my experiences where I was a little disappointed. They were not gracious about changing, but the show got canceled shortly after that. So it was kind of the truth was in the pudding.
Yeah.
But, that's the fun of directing television. I think, now we were still shooting with 3 camera systems. With Frasier, you had a guy on a camera, an operator, you had a focus puller, and then you had a guy on the dolly moving you around. So it was a 3 camera team. Today, they're on PEDs with one guy, and he's moving and focusing and doing everything. But those shows, when we shot on film, and all of those sitcoms were shot on film, and now everything's shot on digital. And digital is much more, well, it's easy. The latitude of the focus is better. The ability to, just keep rolling, just do another one, just back up, because, you never had to sync anything up after that. So it got a little easier in the digital world. When we were doing the Owl movie, they wanted us to shoot that on Genesis, which was Panavision's version of digital. Without film, it's on going to hard drives, and we resisted because the DP for me at the time was a guy named Michael Chapman, who was a Lifetime Achievement Award winner. He had been an operator on Jaws, on The Godfather, on what was the one with Scorsese, Raging Bull, and I mean Michael had been a director himself and didn't like it, but he was an excellent DP. He had a Lifetime Achievement Award. So Michael was the one that said, we're going to be in Florida and it's hot, and we don't want to be dragging cables through the dirt. Let's shoot this on film the old-fashioned way with dapple lighting. We won't bring in a lot of light packages. And he was 100% right. And I liked him from day one.
Yeah.
He came in for our meeting to be the DP, and he read my script and he says, I like the script, but there's one thing that's wrong. And I said, well, what's that? And he goes, well, ospreys don't fly in pairs. They fly alone. I'm like, oh, really? Birds. He goes, yeah, I know. I used to spend a lot of time in Florida. So he'd been around here and everything else. But Michael was the best thing I could do. And he was not expensive at the time because he was like 70. And I remember Walden, the company I was working for, said, why are you hiring this old guy? And I just remember this old guy knows more about making movies than this entire studio.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
That's why I'm hiring him, And when you're on a movie production, your DP and your first AD that's your team. Those are the guys that you lean on. And my first AD, Bruce Moriarty, had done Forrest Gump and done some major movies, and he'd done a couple Bond movies. So he was great. Those were my go-to guys whenever I had issues or problems. But we really got that thing launched in one meeting. We wrote the script. I could back into how that happened.
Yeah, talk about Hoot. I mean, how did the project come? I mean, as we talked about, it was filmed here in Florida. And how did the project come to be?
Well, I knew Jimmy Buffett. We were actually doing a show up in the Redwoods, and we were talking about seaplanes and watches and everything else. And he says, hey, I got this book I want you to read. So he sent me the book by Carl Hiaasen, and I read it, and I called him back, and I said, hey, it's great. It's a great book. I said, make a great little movie. He goes, well, I bought the rights to it. So I was thinking the same thing. So how do we do that? And I said, well, if nobody's bought the book in the galleys, then you got to get a screenplay out of the book that people want to buy. So he said, well, how do we do that? And I said, well, I would write a screenplay. I would take on the screenplay if you guys guarantee me that I direct it. So that was really how that started. So we went down to Key West. We were having a fish sandwich, and we picked up Carl in Marathon, where he was living at the time. And we flew down, and over a fish sandwich, we shook hands and said, okay, we're making this movie. Will's going to write it and direct it, and we'll go pitch it when we get it finished. So I wrote it and did a few drafts and gave it to Carl, and Carl made his notes, and then I gave it to Jimmy, and he gave me some other notes, and I adjusted those notes. And then I was pretty much done with the screenplay as contractually, because I got, I'm in the Writers Guild. So I wrote it under the Writers Guild, auspices. And then Frank Marshall, Jimmy knows Frank, and he gave it to Frank Marshall, and Frank's the real deal. Frank's Sixth Sense, Raiders. I mean, Frank Kennedy Marshall's done everything, And so Frank read it and had some notes about the boy and his father, his relationship. And I said, these notes are great. And I said, I'll just do another rewrite for free because I agree with his notes. So I did that. And then we went to Walden, which was at that time making kids movies. So they had done Narnia, Chronicles of Narnia. They did Holes. They'd done Bridge to Terabithia. They had done about, I don't know, a dozen or so books to film for young adults. So when we had our first meeting, the head of Walden Books, which was Phil Anschutz' company, they had a budget for these kinds of things. He was a big Buffett fan, which didn't hurt either. So we literally left the meeting, and Jimmy was working at the MGM in Vegas, so we flew up there on his plane, and we're having dinner. We got a call from Frank. Well, we're making a movie. So we're like, well, order another bottle of wine. Yeah. So that was how easy that was to get done. Now it doesn't happen. Any filmmaker will tell you that's a fluke. Right. But Walden liked it that much, and then then they come in and they want to start putting their hand all over. They hired another writer to rewrite it, which was, in everybody's opinion, was a horrible rewrite. So Carl, Jimmy, and I all said, well, this ain't the movie we're going to make. We're not doing this one. So we got back to what the original script had, and we kept a few elements we liked out of it. And we got a budget. They went to New Line, and New Line did a negative pickup deal on it. And we were off, in prep. We did about 8 weeks of prep, and I came down here, started scouting and tweaking and shooting in Florida. As you know, Film Florida. I mean, I created a town. There was no Coconut in the book. I think it's called Coconut Cove, but there was no Coconut Cove, and the executives could never figure out, where is this town you're shooting. I go, it's not a town. So we had to make a fake map of where, because the kids would run out of in the movie, the kid will run down a golf course and then cut through the bushes, and then he's in an abandoned, in an old shipyard, in a dry storage yard. And now one was in Boca Grande, and the golf course was in Boca Grande, and the boatyard was here in Fort Lauderdale. So I would just sort of craft the two together and make it feel like it was, because the goal of the movie was to make it look like old Florida. Because I grew up going to school by boat down here as a kid. We would water ski home from school. It was just a great lifestyle in the 60s down here. So as we got to doing it, I said, we want to make it, look like old Florida. So we were shooting at the Anglers Pier on Commercial, and there's a great old pier, and it didn't really need any set dressing. But they kept saying, well, I don't want to look north because there's 15 condos, high rises. I don't want to see that. So we were able to bring in some kind of set pieces to block out certain things we didn't want to see, because we really wanted to feel like old Florida. Yeah. So Boca Grande really fit that bill. Boca Grande's a great spot, but they wouldn't let us shoot the whole movie there. You can have a week there. So we went over there for a week, and we shot a lot of the chase stuff around there. And we went to the first day we shot, we went to the Bonnet House, which was a great location. As the first day of shooting, we had all the executives and everybody came down. They were shooting in that beautiful tiki hut with Brie Larson and Logan Lerman. And, the scenes were good scenes, well written and well, acted. And after 2 days, they were like, okay, you guys are good. And they all went home, which was what you want as a filmmaker. Like, oh, right. We don't need you anymore. So, filming in Florida gave us a huge advantage, is that we didn't have the studio people here all the time. They came, they saw what we were doing. Today they all get their dailies on a DVD, so they could see the dailies. They send those out to everybody. But, we got very few notes while making the movie, which is different than I'm used to in television, where you get a lot of notes from people. Yeah. And the first couple of takes of a scene, I would turn around to make sure everybody's okay. And then I'd realize there's nobody I had to ask back there. And then after a couple of days, I stopped turning around. But as a director, and I was also the producer and the screenwriter, so I had some juice, in what we were doing. But if Frank or Jimmy had a suggestion, Jimmy came around. he was just going to be around a little bit, and I made him the marine biology teacher. I think it was a math teacher in the book. He'll make you the marine science guy. So you're an old hippie, and he loved it. And once he got lines and everything else, he was happy to be in it. He tended to hang out around a lot more because he was enjoying the process.
Yeah.
And Frank was only down here a couple times, but Frank, would see the dailies, and if he had notes, we would address them. But we really never had to go back and fix anything. My only complaint with Hoot was it was really a seventh grade book. It was written for seventh graders. I think it's required reading in Florida schools. But Walden wanted to get the 5-year-olds on wanting to see the movie, so they dumbed it down a lot and over explained things. Like it's initially a mystery where these holes from, what's happening, what are these kids doing, but they spell it out pretty clearly in the first few scenes. So I'm at 20 years later now. I'm going back in and I'm going to look at building a slide deck, a pitch deck to take some of that out, not reshoot, but re-edit and re-release the movie, because here you got kids 20 years ago, they don't know who Hoot is, but they do know Brie Larson, Captain Marvel. They know Logan Lerman. They know Tim Blake Nelson. They know Clark Gregg. I mean, we have a cast you could not assemble today. These are all, big budget stars today. And so I'm hoping and thinking about going back in and seeing if we can't, tweak it. And, I got to get Carl's blessings to do that. We'll see what happens. But, I have another script I wrote based on another Hiaasen book that I'm going to see if I can find interest in it. Because unfortunately, in young adult movies now, unless it's animation or fantasy, they don't do well. Yeah. And they have no foreign market. So if you can't sell them overseas, you've limited, that's why horror does so well, because it goes anywhere. Whereas kids, family films, I mean, some of them do well, but for the most part, they have to be like Lilo and Stitch is the big movie or whatever. So whatever is the big kids movies that's out. But, I also feel like there's a bunch of people that would enjoy the movie again and we couldn't afford to hire these people again.
Right.
I mean, Brie probably makes 10 million a picture now, but they're all great kids. And, the part of the casting as a director, when you cast a movie, I saw Woody Allen once say, if you cast the movie right, you never have to direct. You just point the cameras and go. And I got lucky because I thought that I had directed Brie on a TV show with Bob Saget years ago. So I just thought she was a great little actress. So she was like my discovery, even though she didn't fit the character. In the book, Beatrice the Bear is a big, bullish, tough girl. And I read some big, bullish, tough girls, and they just weren't sympathetic or, they just didn't hit the mark for me. And I just kept fighting for Brie. So we would put her on boxes around other kids to make her look taller. We'd get shorter kids around her. It was all things to make Beatrice the Bear look a little meaner. But, sometimes you fight for what you think is right. And I think Brie was a great choice. And Logan was easy. He came in, he was a polished actor when he read, and he was like, they were like, well, who do you want? I said, I think Logan's the guy. And they go, well, do you have a second choice? And I go, no, I think Logan's the guy. And Logan continues to work. He's got a new movie out now. And he's done, from Fury with Brad Pitt. He's done, Logan's probably done 25, 30 movies. And, then some of the other cast members, Tim Blake Nelson was also a director. He played the guy that looked after the vacant lot. And Clark Gregg is in all the Marvel things. Mm-hmm. And everybody ended up being, of value. And shooting around Florida, we had 34 days of shooting on our schedule. We were always fighting, as you do, you always fight for extra days. But we had 5 days in Boca Grande, and then the rest here. And I never shot an opening. I just shot him getting off the bus because I knew I wanted to show the kid's backstory. And his backstory was his dad was a DEA guy, and they lived in Montana, and he had a great life in Montana riding horses. And then he gets yanked out and brought to Florida. And so he's like a fish out of water here. And he's like a cowboy when he shows up at school. Mm-hmm. So they were like, well, where's the opening? I said, well, that you just got to get your checkbook out. So I got checkbook out for a day to go to Montana and shoot all the aerials. We had a helicopter, and then we had a couple of we had 3 kids that looked like Logan, because Logan wasn't really a horseback rider. We were able to piece together this beautiful opening montage of what Montana was. And so you see him riding his horses and running these beautiful areas of the mountains of Livingston, Montana, and then cross-cut to him arriving in Florida. And now he's in Florida, and it's part of his character. We understood his character just from the opening sequence. Yeah. So when my credit goes by, now we're into the movie on the school bus, which was where I knew we were never going to start, but that's where we had shot. it to start. But I
Yeah.
convinced them for a little more money. It's just you're always asking for money in
Uh-huh.
this business. There's always somebody, hey, we'd love to do this, and we it's always a compromise.
Yeah.
So
Now, Hoot revolves around preserving a habitat for burrowing owls. How did you approach translating Carl Hiaasen's conservation message to young audiences through the film? Like, how important was that part of it?
well, the message is, very important. I mean, we to this day we see schools with owls where they're trying to move them and everything else. The owls are they're not endangered, but they're protected and they're beautiful. They're about the size of a Coke can. They're cute little owls. So my goal was to tell the story, and I got some backlash on Rotten Tomatoes that the kids, they're vandals. They're vandalizing the property, but they're trying to prevent the pancake house from getting built. From they were going to, they've got a big D9 bulldozer. They're going to run and just bulldoze these owls. And so, as Carl used to tell me that construction guys would just put a hose down a burrow and just flood them out and drown them. That's how they got rid of them. So there was, all of that, cruelty that was taken out on the owls. I was just trying to get the message along that, there's nothing wrong with caring about and protecting something. Now Hoot is it's in the Smithsonian for the top 10 environmental movies. It's in the Museum of Modern Art as a family movie. So It's found its way and it's found an audience. There are things in it that if I get to fix it, that I'll take out some of the very first scene, Luke Wilson steps in a hole. What are these holes? Well, in the book, they're holes, and that's the end of it. But, because of the influence of Walden, we had to put an owl popping out of the hole looking around. And I thought, this is too soon. This is too soon. But when you look at the poster and you look at the promos and everything else, the owls were so prevalent, it was hard to not make it about that. So, because they wanted to have animated owls, they wanted to have owl puppets. And I'm like, no, that's, we didn't want the gopher from Caddyshack. We wanted them to be real. So we bought a tabletop, big wooden tabletop, and we built dirt and burrows. And then we trained the animal actor folks, trained these owls to come out on demand to get a cricket and then go back in. Wow. So those were just inserts that we picked up later, but they were all on. There were 3 owls, and they were all quite comfortable doing their little appearance and disappearance, and that's all we really needed them to do. Yeah. But I just remember somebody saying, "Well, why don't we get a guy with a puppet?" I'm like, "Oh no, no."
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the Museum of Modern Art and the Smithsonian, and those recognitions that you have. Like, how important is that to you to be recognized for those?
Well, it's a nice, there was no money involved.
Sure. But at least it was noticed.
It goes on the resume. Yeah, I put it on the resume. No, it's nice. And I do think that, any kind of compliments or any kind of, acknowledgement always feels good for a filmmaker. We don't do this to be in a vacuum. We all want to get, an attaboy and pat it on the back. When you show a movie and then, you have the big premiere, and we had a big premiere, and I think it was in May, because the movie came out May 5th, and they kept saying May 5th. And I said, why May 5th? Kids are still in school. And they said, well, it's counter programming. But May 5th, isn't that Mission Impossible, Da Vinci Code, and Poseidon Adventure? Yeah. And I go, well, they go, we're counter programming, and I'm like, would I pay my $8 to see Hoot? No, I'd go see Mission Impossible. I'd go see a big movie. And I always kind of fought with them about that, but they said, no, we know what we're doing. It's, the studio, once you take their money, as Jimmy used to always say, when you take their money, you get stuck with their opinion. Yeah. So they wanted to put it out in May. And I think, that's what hurt us. Even though we were top 10 the first 2 weeks of release, well, we were also on 3,000 screens, which is a wide release. We don't see, rarely do would a movie like this, a family movie, get that kind of release. But they really believed in it in the testing. You go through a lot of testing with movies. You have focus groups, and you have all you have a lot of opinions. And I used to always say to them, this trailer you're doing, shouldn't that make you want to see the movie as opposed to not want to see the movie? And they would say, we know what we're doing. Leave us alone. Shut up. Yeah, yeah. So, as a filmmaker, you don't get any respect from the studio that's releasing the movie. But, I held my ground, and Jimmy and Carl and I are proud of the movie. I mean, Jimmy is fortunately no longer with us, but he really enjoyed being a part of that. And I think it got him inspired to do some more acting, because he used to do a couple of Hawaii Five-O's and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, talk a little bit more about Jimmy Buffett. Obviously, a beloved Florida figure. Talk about how important his influence was to the tone and the energy of the film and on set.
I didn't know Jimmy well when I knew him a little bit, but he, he personifies Florida. He personifies, I used to say, you don't write as many hits as you do sell a lifestyle. The dream of being on a beach with a margarita and a pretty girl, and in Florida, I said that's what your whole marketing genius is. Now he's got retirement communities. He's, Jimmy's never stopped, building his brand, and Margarita was, but he was able to get doors open for us. He was, he's an icon down here. And back in the days, in those days in 2005, it was us in Miami Vice. Yep. And we got a little bit of rebate money from the state of Florida for the movie. We got 10% of whatever we spent here in rebate. And so we got $1 million from the state of Florida. And I think Miami Vice got 4 or 5 million. But our movie, I still think whenever they show it anywhere, it's still a postcard to Florida. And having Jimmy in it and having Jimmy part of it, and he did the music. Jimmy did all the music. The Coral Reefer Band. We were in L.A. recording, all the stuff, and everybody's in a little booth, and you're listening to Jake Shimakawa and the ukulele, and everybody on the steel drums. I mean, it just had a Florida feel. And what we did with the arrows, we really tried to shoot Florida so you didn't see what it is today. We wanted to make it like we shot it in Ocean Reef area and the mangrove area when the kids are in the boat. So whenever they're moving around, there's not a lot of civilization around them. Yep. And I think that was another appealing point to the movie, and a thing that Jimmy really loved about it. He knew that I knew old Florida, and I think that he trusted me to make sure we shot it that way. We had a great location manager, Sam Tedesco. I don't know if you know Sam, but we were talking shorthand. Like, oh yeah, this place. Oh yeah, let's go down. And there was a place down in by Biscayne, by Seaquarium. There was an old rundown place. They shot a lot of movies there. It was, I can't remember I think it's gone now. But Sam and I had a shorthand. As a matter of fact, where I'm sitting right now, we shot 3 days right on the street behind me. There's a area called Cliff Lake. And we populated it with kids in canoes and snowboards, and the kid on the rope swing. That's where we shot Delinko pulling over Roy. And I just knew these areas. I liked that area so much, I bought a house up the street. But there was a lot to see in Florida and a lot to hide. There's so much character here. And whenever you can avoid not building stuff, that makes it a lot cheaper when you're making, if you're doing a movie. And I think, for Film Florida, I mean, to go around, we looked at a lot of places besides Fort Lauderdale but they kept saying, you can't tell me there's not a house on the beach where you don't see condos. I said, not in Fort Lauderdale. There's a small section. So when we shot the house in Boca Grande where Roy lived, I mean, we're walking down that beach and there's nothing there. And I mean, it was just, and the town itself needed no set dressing. There's a couple scenes on the bikes riding through the banyan trees. And remember, we shot this movie during 4 hurricanes. In September. We had Katrina came over us. We had to let the crew go home for a day and batten down the hatches. Then we shot, and Dennis came up, and there were 4 hurricanes that were coming around, but it didn't dampen our spirit. And they always said, if you shut down, you just lose a day of production. So we kept going. We did have cover sets. You always have a rain set, but we didn't have to use them much. We used them for an interior of Roy's house. We shot on a Pascal lighting stage, and we built the trailer in a warehouse. So if we needed to go inside, but for the most part, Florida, people fear the weather here. And when you're middle of hurricane season, you're either going to go or you're not going to go. But, we've had so many scares on hurricanes in South Florida. We haven't had one here since Wilma in 06 or 05, I think Wilma. And I remember having to fight with the studio. They were like, well, why don't you just shoot this in Santa Fe, was one of their comments. And I go, let me ask you first, did you read the script? And they go, yeah, we read the script. I go, well, there's no boating in Santa Fe. Well, there are lakes there. Well, there's palm trees there. I go, no, but there are, but there's not the Florida. We're trying to capture Florida. So I had to fight for them. But, whenever you're talking about locations, it's all about budget. Santa Fe had some big incentives at the time. And so everybody wanted to do it where they were going to save the most money. And I had to make some compromises because I originally wanted like 38 days of shooting, and we got 34. And and then they were going to 2 days before they're going to pull the plug on a whole picture. I said, okay, well, 34, we'll make it. When you're making movies, you gotta be flexible. And television is great because you're on a sound stage. You got air conditioning. People bring you lunch. there's no weather, there's no hold for the plane, there's none of that. So, but when you're shooting outside, and I remember we looked at a place out at, I don't know, some park, Quiet Meadows Park, and I said, this is the approach path to Fort Lauderdale Airport. This is not going to be good for sound.
Right.
And they were like, well, how do you know that? I go, because I'm a pilot. I know where the approach path is. So we went somewhere else. But, I think as a filmmaker, the more you know, the better off you are, and surround yourself with people that know more than you do.
Yeah. Now, you have a long history of philanthropic work as well, and emceeing special events. You've raised millions of dollars for causes such as children's hospitals, Everglades Foundation. Share a little bit more about some of these causes and how you use comedy to help make an impact.
There was a circuit of tennis players and golfers, and you get invited to go somewhere to raise money for a charity, for Make-A-Wish or whatever. So we would go either on a plane or somebody's private plane would fly us there, and you go and do a golf tournament, and then you do a show at night. And I'm sitting there watching this auctioneer just, kind of struggling through, boring everybody, yelling, and I said, well, I could do that better. So I started doing it myself. I was doing it for Bob Goen, who was the host of Wheel of Fortune for a long time and Entertainment Tonight. So we went to his tournament in Denver for Make-A-Wish. And I got up and did the auction, and I raised like 4 times the money they've ever raised. And they were like, wow. I try to make it funny. When you do an auction, you got 6 people, 10 people bidding, the other 150 you could care less. So I would put in humor and jokes, and I would incentivize people, and I kind of pick on people a little bit. If it was jewelry, I'd say, you might get lucky tonight if you buy this necklace, and it was a lot of that kind of stuff. And I started doing it, and it just kind of caught on. For the Boys and Girls Club in Pebble Beach, I think we raised like $500,000 in one afternoon, one evening. But we had great items. And, I always say as an auctioneer, you're only as good as the items and the people in the room. If nobody in the room's got any money, you're not going to raise a lot of money. Mm-hmm. But I kind of found myself just my comedy background and enjoying doing it. So, I've done it all over here. I've done back when the Morans, when Jan and Pat Moran were around, I would do all of their stuff, their automotive, youth and automotive. And we go into a big ballroom, and the goal is to get people to pony up. I did one for the Coast Guard Foundation. I said, what are the items? Oh, there are no items. I go, well, what are we auctioning off? They go, well, we're just raising money, just pledging. I said, so you have no auction. Do they have paddles? No, they don't have paddles. They don't have anything. And I said, well, this sounds tricky. But I got up and I said, okay, here's the game, folks. We're here for the Coast Guard Foundation. It was a worthwhile cause. And I said, if we can raise a certain amount of money, I think my first one was, if we get to 10,000, I'm going to tell you a great joke. You can go to work tomorrow and you'll be the funniest guy in the office. And we did that 5 times. We got up to $55,000.
Wow.
Just on the prom. And I remember the lady coming up to me, and I had a couple jokes about killing my wife. And the lady came up to me. She goes, well, we didn't appreciate your killing your wife jokes. This was a night honoring women. I go, well, you might have told me that. but it was all right. They raised $55,000 with nothing. Yeah. So, I do that now. I'm going to do one for Jack and Jill, which is a center in Fort Lauderdale. And I do it. I don't want to travel as much because when you go, I went to Louisville to do one for an orphanage. And I went to the orphanage and met the kids, and we showed Hoot, and then we talked to them about it. And these kids were all taken away from their parents and put there by the state. It was so sad and heartbreaking. I just remember, like, when I came on to do the auction, and the priest from the orphanage was talking, people were drinking and talking. And when I got up there, I took the mic. I said, excuse me, Father. Ladies and gentlemen, settle down and listen to what this man. I mean, I really berated the audience. I said, you should see what this man is doing at the Holy Mother Orphanage. And so he said, thank you. And he gave his pitch. And I went up there and I raised a lot of money because I was so inspired by what I saw there. Those are things that, those other things in your life. You always find, I believe you got to find somebody to love, something to do, and something you look forward to. So I always look forward to auctions. And I love making television and movies. As I get older, I don't do it as often. I mean, I tell people, you can do anything with an iPhone. You can do it with a GoPro. You can make a movie. If you got good story and good characters, it doesn't really matter what format it's shot on. You can shoot it on anything. It's got to be written well. It's got to be interesting. People send me scripts all the time because they think I can go get it made. And I said, well, if I could get your script made, I would get my script made.
Exactly.
But I mean, Florida is the guys I know down here. I mean, there's some great guys. Pete Zuccarini's a great underwater photographer. Jordan Klein, they've got drone guys. I mean, there's talent pool here.
Yep.
And sadly, most of them went to Georgia because after Hoot, there was a real sort of slowdown, and slowly people are coming back. I know people are building stages. I think Fort Lauderdale, they're going to take the old Super PAC site and build some sound stages and things, which would be great to have some sound stages, things like that. But still, I think when people come to Florida, they want to film Florida.
Yep.
They don't want to film on a sound stage, so you gotta put Florida out there. But I mean, the palette is great. I mean, we have a palette that if you want Miami Beach, you got that. If you want sleepy little cracker town Florida, you got that. I mean, it's everywhere, and then the idea when you're filming, you got to make your day. So you have to we always had to make our day. So we had to find locations. So if we had 3 or 4 different scenes, that they could all be done in that location, because when you have a company move, you lose 3 hours of a workday, because you got to load the trucks and unload the trucks. So in my location scouting, I always found places that I could make work for multiple scenes, like the Anglers Club, which is the pier at Commercial. There was a little city hall just around the corner. So we'll make that Coconut Grove City Hall. That's where he gets his car. So we were able to get a full day's work out of every location. And that's something people don't think about, but it's important, because when you're moving, and even though we have a lighter footprint now with all the digital stuff, you still got to get people moved and everything else. So with the helicopter, we really got all of Florida, because we were able to, in one day, to shoot. We started in Everglades City, and we came up on the West Coast, and then we went into Boca Grande. And then on the way back here, we shot some stuff here along the New River, and we were able to get everything in a day in a helicopter. But the helicopter is expensive now. Most people are doing things with drones now, and you really don't need a helicopter. I mean, I had fun sitting in the back of the helicopter all the time, because I go, let's get closer to that peak, and then let's arc up. We'll boom up over that, and we were really close. I mean, the blades were almost hitting the rocks. And I remember saying to our pilot, and I said, "Does this make you nervous?" And he goes, "No, I flew in Vietnam. There's nobody shooting at me." So we had an old helicopter guy, Art Guthrie, I think it was Art Guthrie. And all these guys, we found a lot of great people here. I mean, they didn't want to bring in a lot of crew. So to speak to Florida's another advantage is, all of our grips and electric and gaffers and talent, our transpo guys. I mean, almost everybody except some of the actors. We found a number of actors here. There were parts they would say, find a local hire. When you hire a local hire, you don't have to pay per diem, you don't have to pay transport, you don't have to put them up. So we found John Archie, and we found, a bunch of great actors here. I forget, I can't remember her name now, but she came in, and she was from Jamaica to play one of the doctors, and she played it with an English accent. And as she was leaving, she said something with Jamaica. I said, "Are you from Jamaica?" She says, "Yeah." I said, "Oh, do it again with a Jamaican dialect." And it was fabulous, because where do you see in Florida? There's a lot of Jamaican doctors in the hospitals. So I was always trying for authenticity when I could down here in terms of casting. And Lori Wyman was a great help. Lori knew everybody, and we found a lot of good people here. And the ones we didn't find here, there's things called Cast It now, where people can put themselves on tape anywhere. And that's where we found the bully, the kid that played Dana, the bully. He was out of Chicago. He was doing stuff with Second City, but he put himself on tape, and they showed me the tape, and I was like, "Yeah, like it. Let's bring him in." Because I hate that process of self-taping, but that's the way of the world now.
Yes.
And I actually, Lori was looking for somebody for the Versace. So, I said, "Oh, you want looking for a report? I'll do that." And I put myself in front of the motel from the scene with a green screen. And she goes, "Oh, it was so great, but we already cast it." I'm like, "Oh, well, I didn't even practice."
That's funny.
But they, there's a lot of, you're not an actor though, are you?
I am not. No.
Yeah. So, but actors, we're all vulnerable, we all want to.
Yes.
So I have the ego of an actor and the confidence of a director.
Well, I guess that's a good combination. So, Wil, where can our audience learn more about you and keep up everything on you're doing?
Well, I have a website, shrinermedia.com. I don't have upcoming projects there, but I have, my past, my history. There's clips and videos and stuff. There's, samples of the auctioneering stuff, and there's, and there's some acting clips, and there's some directing clips, and there's some producing things. I produce stuff for other people, but I don't put that stuff on there. I'll help people. I'm going to do a tribute to Johnny Carson's 100th anniversary in a few months, and so I got to tune up a little bit for that because they're gonna have Johnny introduce us all, and it's all acts that were on the Tonight Show. So I'm doing it for the fun of, because I did, I don't know, 14, 15 Tonight Shows, and so and that was a career maker for most comedians.
Yeah,
is to go on there, and I was trying to explain to kids when I was there last time that when you went on the Tonight Show, the next day it was like winning American Idol because 40 million, 30 million people saw you. So when you get your dry cleaning, you're getting gas. Hey, I saw you last night. So it was a very huge exposure in those days. Today, these late night shows, I don't think they mean a whole lot to anybody in terms of exposure. It's a credibility thing. But the comedy scene today, you got guys like Nate Bargatze and Sebastian Maniscalco and Chappelle and these guys who are making 40, 50 million a year doing arenas.
Yeah.
It's a very profitable profession. So when I was doing it, there was, 300, 400 comics. Now there's 300,000 comics. It's still fun. There's nothing like, I always tell people, there's nothing like making people laugh. A friend of mine stopped me the other day. He says, I'm doing my first open mic this weekend. I said, be confident. Don't show weakness, because they come, open mic nights, they're like roadkill. Oh, we're going to just watch this guy lose his shit on in front of 300 people. Yeah. So it's good. It's a great fun thing. But that's where my stuff is on. It lurks around on the, if you Google me, I'm all over I met a girl. She said, "What do you do?" I said, just Google me. And she's like, "What an asshole! Why?" And then she did Google me. She called me back.
I Googled you and I couldn't believe how many pages you were on. So it's the truth. Yeah. It's the truth. You've had an amazing career. And so I appreciate you being with us to tell your stories and share your expertise. I love the stories. We're certainly glad to have you here in Florida. And I just want to thank you for being on the Film Florida podcast with us today.
Yeah. Any way I can help, support, and I've sent some letters and sent clips to Tallahassee to try to, whatever we can do to get more films and more filmmakers in Florida. I think it's so important. It's good for tourism. It's good for the economy. It's good for everything.
But Wil, we appreciate you being with us today, and thanks for being on the Film Florida podcast. And we are certainly going to take you up on the offer to help bring more film to Florida.
All right, John, I appreciate that. Thanks for having me on, and go Florida. I was a Gator for 2 years.
Thanks for listening to the Film Florida podcast. For more information about Film Florida, go to filmflorida.org and like or follow our social media pages. If you're not already a member of Film Florida, please consider joining at filmflorida.org. Please also consider going to our website and donating $20.25 for our 2025 fundraising campaign. Check out the Film Florida merchandise at filmflorida.creator-spring.com, and please remember to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast.